Hello and welcome to the ESG MENA podcast. I'm your host, Madeline Dunn, and today we're joined by Stuart Rees, the founder and CEO of Cancer International, which is currently celebrating 20 years of delivering ethical expeditions all across the world. Thanks for joining us today, Stuart.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the podcast. Just to start, I think it would be great to hear a little bit about sort of Camp International, the motivation and mission behind it, some of the projects and how they align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay. Well, when we started, the UN Sustainable Development Goals didn't exist. So I think we were new to the game. It's been useful that someone's come on since and defined what we were doing for a good 12 years before that became a thing. But look, I kind of fell into this by accident. I was an accidental businessman and philanthropist, I guess. My history was military, and then I was doing mountain climbs and leading various expeditions and things. And I just became very frustrated. I always tried to tag on time with a local community on any trip we were doing. And very long story short, I got frustrated that any projects we did fell apart. By the time I came back to a classroom we built, there were chickens in it, or the guttering had fallen off of a water catchment roofing system, or something like that. So the basic business plan for us was, if we want to make a meaningful, sustainable impact on the communities and the environment we work with, you need to be there year round, and you need to work in collaboration with all the stakeholders. So the solution to that was a camp. We started in Kenya with one camp in a community alongside some mangroves. And over the last 20 years, we took that model to Tanzania, Borneo, Cambodia, and then into Latin America with Ecuador, Peru, and Cambodia, Costa Rica. Apologies. And the model is that we first and foremost agree and set our sustainable development goals for the various projects that we're engaged with. So that's community development, healthcare, water security, environmental conservation issues for both marine and terrestrial and wildlife. And once we're happy we can deliver on those also safely for our market, which is students, all of our groups of schools, then we build a camp with the local community in the local style. We employ the locals to staff and run that camp, and we stay there for years. Well, 20 years now. A lot of our camps we've been around for over a decade. So that's the basic camps model. We're still going.
Right, brilliant. And can you tell me a little bit more about sort of the environmentally focused projects that you have going on that you mentioned?
Sure. I think the first thing to note is that you can't approach, in the kind of environments we're in, you can't approach just one project in isolation, because invariably they're connected. If you want to work on a community project for instance, we have camps all over the place, but if I start, I'll sort of showcase a few locations. We have a project in Kenya. We do a lot in terms of school building. We worked on over 112 classrooms built and renovated over the years. But if you're building a school, you're by default engaged with the stakeholders of that school, which is the teaching staff, local government, the students themselves, and the parents. And they all come with their own set of issues. And we're working in places where there's human-wildlife conflict with elephants. So we need to find ways to monetize the wildlife so that the wildlife gets conserved. There's not a lot of point building classrooms if the students don't have something to eat. So food storage becomes an issue. To work on anything, the Taru Desert where we work, it's you've got to have water as a key focus of anything you're doing. So, but that is linked to reforestation. We've planted over 1 million trees over 20 years. So anything we're doing is, to answer your question specifically, we do a lot of reforestation. We do a lot to do with environmental projects that enable the communities, support the communities in their initiatives to conserve water. So gravity water feed systems in Borneo. In Cambodia, we've got a very successful we make water containers with the community to enable them to have the facilities to collect and conserve water. digging waterhole systems and assisting with wildlife, the water for wildlife, which in turn has an impact on the local. It's quite a we have over 73 live projects.
Wow. And it does very much seem that sustainability is very much at the heart of everything that the organisation does. And I know there is an element of the tourism aspect, bringing the students over. But I was just wondering if you could give me some insight into what sustainable tourism means to you, and sort of how you ensure that you maintain that when you're pursuing the projects.
I think back to my first point, you need to be there. You need to collaborate with, you need to be working alongside local people and not coming in to gift. This is not an act of gifting. This is not an act of we're coming in to save you. They're doing very well themselves in many cases. But what we are able to do is bring in and act as a catalyst for change and bring in an enormous amount of support, both financially. The students become the conduit to it, because we have a thing called the camps effect, which is we want to have an equal impact on the planet. So the environment that hosts us, and the definition of environment is the people that live in it as well, but also that our students that travel with us, we want to turn them into global ambassadors for conservation, for environmental and wildlife conservation. So you have to be able to join all those bits of the jigsaw together, and you can't do that if you're working in isolation. So it's you have to be there. You have to be working on projects that are needed and defined by the local people. They have to be deliverable. You can't be a politician. You have to do what you say you're going to do. And we've been going long enough now that we can test the metrics on that. We can see that if we built a classroom, we now have the data to see if that's improved the educational standards, and more kids have gone into higher education and in turn got better jobs and return money to the community, as an example.
Right. So it sounds like you're working very, very closely with the communities that you're in, and sort of, I know that there is a big emphasis on support over saviorism within the organisation, which definitely comes across.
The brilliant, first of all, you shouldn't be engaging in that. You have to be quite careful about the kind of projects you engage with. We don't, for example, work with orphanages. We learned very early on, there's just too many areas of sensitivity. It's very difficult to get that right. But the brilliant thing about the young people that travel with us, I've got two daughters. I complain daily about the amount of time they spend on their phones. But the positive side of that, social media, is it cuts through any kind of greenwashing. The young people that travel with us, you're effectively constantly under audit. They come on a camp trip because they want to do something meaningful with impact. And they will very quickly sniff out if you're just putting a lick of paint on something that doesn't need it.
Right.
But yes, the answer to that is back to making sure. Here's a good example. We have a camp in Kenya. We agreed our projects that we do with the community, which was healthcare, school construction and renovation, water and food security was a big one. There's a lot of reforestation issues to enable them to capture water. A whole bunch of stuff. Animal conservation, elephant population locally. So we agreed that. We then bought a piece of land off the local women's group. But then a third of our camp is then effectively gifted back to the women's group, on which we've got an agricultural project, enabling to grow seedlings, propagation. We have effectively what is a training centre there, so the local ladies can train each other in various business things. There's table banking runs from there. They have a craft shop, which is directly for the students. And the camp was built entirely by that women's community and provides a lot of jobs in the area as well. So, and we're in areas where there wouldn't be tourism. That's another key factor.
Okay. And sort of going back to the students as well, I know that obviously travelling has been identified as a huge benefit to children's development, sort of helping them build their empathy and sort of world view. I was just sort of wondering from the student perspective, how the students get involved and how the organisation ensures that it's as accessible as possible to, a wide range of students to be able to have that experience and be involved. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a common assumption, because trips like this are not cheap. There's a common assumption that it's the private schools and the well-off that go on it. Actually, a vast number of our students, certainly out of the UK, a bit different in the UAE because there's many international schools in the UAE, but out of the UK is they're normal state schools like the one I went to. We invariably are the trip, but to make it something that anyone can engage with is we launch the trip typically a year and a half before departure.
Right.
So a lot of the students that come on our trips are either match funding with their parents and grandma and granddad, or in many cases they're funding their whole trip, and it becomes a vehicle for a lot of other aspects of their life as well, in terms of getting their studies in line, getting a job, learning about life. Life's rewards come normally at the end of a lot of hard work. So a lot of the students earn their place on the trip in the first place. So the diversity of students we have is huge. Because we sell book trips from UK, the UAE, the wider GCC region, Southeast Asia, and Australia. So we have a complete blend, and age groups, covering from 13 all the way through to 18 years old.
Wow, yeah, very diverse. And sort of, what is the impact? What is the sort of response that you get back from the students? How they're receiving it?
I think the student response, I think I always feel slightly guarded here because I don't want to sound like I'm completely blowing a trumpet, but if you manage to keep going for 20 years and fundamentally stick at what you were doing 20 years ago and it still works, albeit with some tweaks, we get extraordinary feedback. I'm sad to say that, the first students I took away are now, some of them, in their late 30s with kids of their own, which ages you quite quickly. But as a result, we see the full circle, and we have a good alumni in that respect. And it's not just the student. There's two case studies here. There's the students, and there's also the students from the schools we work on. So we get excellent feedback from the young people that travel with us. There's excellent feedback from the schools, because quite often the students that go on the trip, the point I made earlier, it gets other aspects of their life aligned. So quite often they're doing very well in terms of their university applications. Right. And I think if you are at 16, and bear in mind when you first see the trip, you might be 14, 15, you engage with something which is quite scary. In a year and a half, I'm going to go away for a month to Costa Rica or the Borneo jungle or Kenya, and away from mum and dad. And I'm going to work for a month on a whole variety of projects, which is, these guys really, they work incredibly hard. And I'm going to climb a mountain or track a jungle or dive an ocean. When you've done that, that's in the bank. No one can take that away from you. That's part of your personal CV. That's a benchmark of achievement that you've done. And so I think it creates a lot of awareness for young people of their abilities.
Right.
And that's the feedback we get. On the recipient side, I had a really nice one. I was in Kenya last week, and I was sitting in a hotel ordering a pizza, and I got chatting to the local Kenyan guy who's 27 years old, and I gave him a hit of my bad Swahili, and he said, he connected which company I was connected with,
right.
And he dropped his tray almost, and he said, "I'm here because of that." He said, "I was 9 years old in Makongeni village when you built the camp there, and they were under trees at that stage, and we built a school. We ended up with 800 students in that school from 140. And he ended up getting sponsored through our foundation, and he went the distance to university, and he's got a good job now, and he's supporting his family."
Wow.
So that's the kind of metrics you get when you've been around a while, which is cool.
And yeah, sort of drawing from that, I know, as we said at the beginning of the pod, you're now celebrating 20 years of delivering these kind of expeditions. But what are some of the highlights in terms of impact? Similar stories, I assume, of first-hand accounts.
I think you get, funnily enough, so the big ticket items, when you open a large community centre or a big water project, by virtue of the scale of it, it's you feel incredibly proud. We've got pre-pandemic, we had 170 staff at camps. We're crawling back up again. We're up at 106 staff globally, re-employing a lot of the people we lost during the pandemic. But they're all incredibly invested. The team that works at camps, they do it because they have a strong sense of belief in what we're doing. And so, a lot of our employees are from those local communities. So they're engaged not just with the student tourism aspect of it, but also their own community benefits. So that can get quite emotional, if I'm honest. You stand amongst a few hundred opening something of significance. I think quite often for me, it's the smaller ones. It's the ones like the guy in the restaurant. That's when you get you can't cheat that one. That is what it is. But we've done some cool stuff. We've over 1 million trees. There's no small feat.
Yeah.
There's a lot of classrooms standing. There's a lot of kids sitting in classrooms right now because of sustainable tourism.
And I know a moment ago as well, you mentioned sort of the impact of COVID, and I was wondering, considering the sort of business that you are, what kind of impact that's had, and also sort of how it's impacted the volunteering landscape as well.
We actually did a bit of an audit on it because you can imagine, we effectively, for us, it was 2.5 years. We had just shy of 6,000 students booked who weren't able to travel. Some deferred, others unfortunately cancelled. It was a spectacularly, unthinkably difficult time for both us and our community of schools that we work with. We carved a way through it, but we then had a look at what the impact was of us not being there, because it was quite harsh actually. Our camps, we managed to, we mothballed them, but we kept them alive. Some we let go. But it's when you go back in and you realise that the roofing system you put on 3 years ago, hasn't been maintained because you're not there. And it's the roofing system that collects the water in the gutter that fills the tanks. There was a long list of things that had suffered as a result of us not being there. Right. And we calculated that we had lost just under 1 million project hours.
Wow.
Because when you take 6,000 students doing on average 6 to 8 hours worth of project work a day on a 28-day itinerary, of which 16, 17 days are spent on projects, that's a lot of impact that's missing. So ironically, we saw some of what we do through not being around doing it.
Right.
But I'm glad to say we're back and
yeah. No, well, that's great to hear. I mean, and just sort of building from that as well, and sort of hearing that you are back. I just wanted to sort of lastly check in about your projections for the future of the company, and also your projections for sustainable tourism more broadly as well. Actually, this is a bit I'm quite proud of. I'm going to bang the drum a little bit. I think we made some really brave decisions, and have done since we started the business, to make sure that everything we do is underpinned by purpose. You need to be profitable. You need to, if you're in any kind of business, you need to be profitable to be sustainable commercially. We have a lot of licensing that we have to have as a flight inclusive traveller, etc. But if you chase that at the cost of your principles and your ethos, in our case, at the cost of the camps effect, and you take shortcuts, I don't think you survive things like COVID-19. Right. And I think it was because of the culture of our business and our team and our supporting wider community and the communities we work with. Everyone got their game face on. Because everyone was invested. It wasn't just about the dollar. There was so much more at stake. And honestly, I think above everything else, that's probably what carried us through. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us on the pod today, Stuart. It's been great hearing about cancer and the impact that you've had. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me. Cheers.
You take care.